Coming up today, South Korea demands North Korea scrap its plans to launch a long-range rocket later this month. Pyongyang claims the launch is intended to put a satellite into orbit. The US and Japan say the launch announcement further underscores the need for the world to send North Korea a firm message that the regime's disregard for its international obligations will not be tolerated. Plus, the first case of the Zika virus being transmitted sexually in the US has been reported as more cases pop up in the Americas and Asia. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 3rd of February. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon. North Korea has given notice of a forthcoming satellite launch, or as the rest of us call it, a ballistic missile test. Pyongyang has told UN and other international agencies that the rocket launch will happen sometime during a roughly 2.5-week window this month. The launch that will allow the regime to test out its missile technology will add to the global outrage over the nuclear test North Korea carried out on January 6th. South Korea naturally is deeply concerned and is demanding North Korea reconsider its plans. Now, given the seriousness of the situation, the government called a National Security Council meeting this morning. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Ji-sun joins us from Cheongwadae for the latest. Ji-sun.
Mark, North Korea has notified relevant international organizations of maritime affairs and telecommunications that will launch a satellite called Kwangmyeong-song sometime between February 8th and the 25th. Now, although Pyongyang claims the satellite is for Earth observation, South Korea and the U.S. say it is almost certainly a cover for a ballistic missile test. Very little is known about the technical capability of North Korean satellites or if they're even functional. Of greater concern is that any satellite sits atop a long-range, multi-stage rocket that is the equivalent of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Such a missile, if perfected, could be fitted with a nuclear warhead and used to strike the United States. As touched upon, South Korea's presidential office held a hastily arranged National Security Council meeting at 8 a.m. this morning. Officials warned the North to cancel its missile launch, saying it would be a clear breach of international resolutions and further destabilize the region after the regime's recent nuclear test.
At a time when new sanctions are discussed following its fourth nuclear test, North Korea's announcement of a long-range missile launch is a direct challenge to the international community. Pyongyang must realize that any launch using ballistic missile technologies is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and must immediately withdraw the launch plan.
Now, South Korean officials say that if North Korea pushes ahead regardless, the launch will pose a serious threat to the peace on the Korean Peninsula, in Northeast Asia region and the world. We must also keep in mind that this launch announcement comes just less than a month after North Korea conducted its fourth nuclear test on January 6. In cooperation with the international community, South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are seeking the strongest sanction ever on North Korea for last month's provocation. South Korea also say will stay on full military readiness against any North Korean provocation and threat, including this rocket launch that threatens the safety and security of its people. I'm Song Ji-sun reporting live from the Presidential Office of Cheongwadae.
Thank you, Ji-sun. Now, the international condemnation of North Korea's planned rocket launch is growing. The United States and Japan immediately called the threat a clear violation of a UN ban on North Korea testing ballistic missile technology. This also puts the focus back on the North's longtime ally, China, whose top nuclear envoy is currently in Pyongyang. Kwon So-ah has the details.
A serious provocation. That's what Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said of North Korea's satellite launch plan, adding it would be a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions banning ballistic missile technologies. He told the Japanese parliament on Wednesday that the country would work with the United States and the international community to, quote, strongly demand that Pyongyang refrain from its rocket launch. The U.S. reaction was similar.
I feel confident in telling you that the international community would regard a step like that by the North Koreans as just another irresponsible provocation and a clear violation of their international obligations.
The White House spokesman said the U.S. has been working closely not just with its allies, South Korea and Japan, but with UN Security Council members in China and Russia to confront Pyongyang for its destabilizing activities. He added the U.S. is encouraging cooperation from China due to its influence on the North. That's also why the international community's attention is fixed on Beijing, as its top nuclear envoy Wu Dawei is currently in Pyongyang. Wu is widely expected to bring up the North's nuclear test last month, the reason for the UN Security Council's current push toward tougher sanctions on the regime. But there is also growing anticipation that China could try to deter North Korea from going through with its latest threat, the satellite launch. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, the South Korean military has deployed an additional Aegis destroyer to better track the path of the upcoming rocket launch. According to military officials on Wednesday, one destroyer will be on standby in the West Sea, while the other will be stationed on the southern side of the peninsula in waters off Jeju Island. The Aegis is equipped with Spy 1D radar that has a range of up to 1,000 kilometers. The military has also deployed other surveillance assets, including PSI surveillance planes and Green Pine radar. North Korea is reportedly building a facility designed to produce tritium, which is a key component for hydrogen bombs, citing a report by US-based Institute for Science and International Security. Seoul-based Yonhap news agency says satellite imagery of North Korea's Yeonbyung nuclear complex shows external construction signatures at the site, such as vehicles and construction material. The institute said that while the precise purpose of the site remains unknown, analysis of satellite imagery is consistent with an isotope separation facility, including tritium separation. The institute also said that its assessment is shared by a government expert well versed in assessing the activities at North Korea's main nuclear site. The number of people allowed to stay overnight at the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex dropped in January following North Korea's fourth nuclear test. South Korea's unification ministry said on Wednesday that an average of 570 people stayed at the complex last month, a decline of more than 20% from last year. Ministry officials say the drop is mainly due to a new government policy that only allows South Koreans who are directly linked to production to stay overnight at the complex. Seoul imposed the partial entry limit in the week following Pyongyang's nuclear test to ensure the safety of its citizens. Now, facing sluggish exports and weak domestic demand, the South Korean government has announced a set of new measures to prop up the ailing economy. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
Korea will front-load roughly $5 billion more of its budget in the first quarter of this year. The government expects the extra injection will boost the country's growth rate by 0.2 percentage points over the corresponding period. The government will also raise the amount of state funds provided for local companies by about $12.5 billion. That will put the total amount of increased fiscal spending during the first quarter to more than $17 billion. Extending a tax cut for automobiles to June, which was set to expire last year, is also part of a new set of measures to shore up the economy. The measures laid out during a ministers' meeting on Wednesday come as exports lose steam while demand within the country remains tepid. Exports, Korea's traditional growth engine, dropped by their biggest margin in over 6 years last month and posted their 13th straight month of decline. Some experts are also concerned that spending could flatline early this year as domestic consumption late last year was artificially driven up by temporary
Korea's foreign exchange reserves dropped for the third consecutive month in January. The Bank of Korea says the country's FX reserves amounted to just over $367 billion as of the end of last month, down $670 million from the previous month. The central bank attributes the downturn to a decline in the value of non-US dollar assets amid the recent appreciation of the greenback. But it added that earnings generated by managing the foreign reserves actually increased last month. As of December, South Korea was the 7th largest holder of foreign reserves in the world. Global stocks have taken yet another tumble on the back of another steep drop in oil prices. On Wall Street on Tuesday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average slumped 1.8%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq shed 1.9% and 2.2% respectively. In Europe, Britain's FTSE and Germany's DAX dropped around 2%. Now, this downturn is attributed to a steep drop in oil prices yet again. The US crude oil benchmark, WTI West Texas Intermediate, was down 5.5% on Tuesday, dipping below $30 a barrel once again. The sell-off in oil and stocks sent investors fleeing to safer assets such as US government bonds. Now, the oil price drop has affected a number of countries that depend on exports for growth. And that includes Korea, which saw its outbound shipments plunge again last month after 13 straight months of decline. The Korean government has vowed to launch some new initiatives to try and counter the trend. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The Trade Ministry says it will expand the number of times it sends trade delegations around the world, from 73 to 109 in the first half of the year. In particular, the ministry says it is hoping to engage new trading partners, such as Cuba, and strengthen existing relationships, such as with Iran, by helping Korean exporters build new distribution chains in the target countries. The ministry says it will also work on boosting exports to China, Korea's biggest trading partner, by helping local exporters advance into China's consumer market. In order to do that, the ministry plans to increase research and development of Korean cosmetics and medical products while boosting shipments of agricultural and marine products. It will also establish an $82.4 million development fund to promote Korean cultural content and build a cultural content center in Beijing. To maximize its free trade agreement with China, the Trade Ministry says it will launch series of trade events throughout the year. The ministry plans to give Korean products that are sold online a mark to certify the quality of the products for foreign consumers. Trade Minister Chu Young-hwan said the country's export decline is due to falling global oil prices and the slowdown in global economic growth. Korea's exports in January dropped 18.5% from the previous month, the biggest plunge in nearly 6.5 years. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, the World Health Organization is warning that Asia and Africa could be particularly vulnerable to the Zika virus. The UN agency says Asia could face the biggest threat from the serious birth defects that may be linked to the virus, given the region's birth rate is the highest in the world. African countries with poor health infrastructure could also be extremely vulnerable to the virus as well. The WHO's Director for Maternal, Child and Adolescent Health is calling for the establishment of surveillance sites in low and middle income countries so authorities can quickly detect any changes in the frequency of microcephaly cases. And the Zika virus outbreak is stoking fears around the world as it does continue to affect more and more people around the world. After seeing cases tick closer to 4,000 now, Honduras has instituted emergency measures to combat the spread. Further north in the US, the first case of the Zika virus being transmitted sexually has been reported. Park Jong-hong has the details.
Global concerns about the Zika virus are intensifying, with Honduras becoming the latest country in Central and South America to declare a state of emergency. This comes after the nation's health ministry reported at least 3,700 people have been infected since Honduras confirmed its first infection 7 weeks ago. But some observers say the figure could be inflated as Zika symptoms can be confused with similar mosquito-borne viruses such as dengue. Authorities in the U.S. have confirmed the first case of Zika in Dallas. What's raising eyebrows is that this is the first known case in the U.S. to be acquired through sexual contact. The Dallas County Health Department says the patient, whose identity has not been disclosed, had sex with someone who was ill and had just returned from Venezuela. The patient had not personally traveled to the South American country. County authorities say there have been no reports of the virus being transmitted by mosquitoes in Texas. In Thailand, a 22-year-old man was confirmed to have contracted the virus. Officials say his symptoms were a fever, rashes, and redness of the eyes. He had never traveled outside the country. The man has since recovered and has been discharged from the hospital. But few other details were provided. Thai health officials say that since the first case was confirmed in 2012, Thailand has seen fewer than 5 cases a year. They say locals and tourists shouldn't panic as all of the cases in Thailand have been isolated and one-off incidents. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Now, people in the US might have a slightly better idea who might be squaring off against each other in next year's presidential election after the would-be presidents had their first real test in Iowa. Texas Senator Ted Cruz caused a huge upset by beating Donald Trump in the Midwestern states' Republican caucuses, while Hillary Clinton claimed the narrowest of all narrow victories over rival Bernie Sanders. While finishing third in the Republican vote, that man there, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, far exceeded expectations and may now actually emerge as the establishment choice for the Republicans. The Iowa caucuses are usually seen as a bellwether for candidates' chances in the upcoming campaign. The next contest is in New Hampshire in less than 1 week's time. And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out our website, arirang.com/news. Have a great day. Goodbye.